No one better to talk about this than Katja Hoyer. She's the German-British historian and journalist whose column for The Spectator yesterday discussed this very subject, why German politicians fear Musk's AfD interview. But she's also the author of an excellent book called Beyond the Wall. Good morning, Katja.
Morning.
Good to have you back on the programme. So is Musk going to make a difference to the German elections, which are due to be held on the 23rd of February?
I'm not sure he's going to have an impact immediately because he's not going to convince anyone to vote for the AfD who has previously kind of not voted for them, I think, and vice versa. He's not going to put anybody off, I don't think, who is currently on track to do that. But I think what his impact will be long term is to maybe shift the relationship between the conservatives or more libertarian-minded people in the AfD, because so far they've pretty much been sort of beyond the pale for a lot of German conservatives. And now that a much admired sort of businessman, very successful businessman, is endorsing them, I think that might shift the way that kind of disgruntled conservatives see the AfD in the long term.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because Germany has a very odd attitude towards extreme wealth, if I remember correctly. I mean, the guy who's currently, set to become the next chancellor, Friedrich Merz, of the CDU, the Christian Democrats, was widely criticized a long time ago for having one or two private planes or access to them. This was seen to be completely beyond the pale, unacceptably wealthy for a German politician because he worked for a private equity company. He's now got back into politics. And I just wonder whether Musk would come up against similar criticism. He's just too wealthy for your average German.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think a lot of the criticism that you see from the mainstream press towards Musk kind of goes in that direction. The idea that sort of extreme wealth is connected to too much power, too much influence, corruption. You must have done something bad to get there, basically. There's obviously the Tesla factory just out on the outskirts of Berlin that was highly controversial, still is highly controversial in Germany. Actually, there was a lot of criticism from the AfD against that as well, interestingly enough, but they didn't get to that in their conversation yesterday.
Yeah, of course not. No.
But yeah, I think there's also a spectrum on the kind of German political landscape of libertarians who've been fed up with that for a long time, and they're looking for a vehicle, basically a pro-business kind of approach to politics, and they're not entirely sure whether they get that with the CDU, despite kind of Friedrich Merz's own involvement with the private sector.
And there's also the attitude in Germany towards personal data. I mean, one of the important things about these social media giants is that we saw this with Meta and Mark Zuckerberg, is that they own your data and they use that data almost like sort of gold mines or oil mines of old, oil wells of old, as a very precious commodity. And we know in Germany, especially Eastern Germany, which still remembers the Stasi days, that personal data is something very precious. So how does that mentality play into what Musk is trying to do?
Yeah, you're right. It is, data protection is a big thing in Germany. I was really surprised when I moved to Britain, a long time ago, many years ago now, and people took a much more relaxed attitude towards, CCTV, sort of things in public and so on, than they do in Germany, where this is always a big thing. I think, as you're saying, it's the Stasi memory on the one hand side, but before that, the Nazis. I think there's a lot in the German psyche that is suspicious towards data collection. And now that this is happening outside of Germany, there's a lack of control over this. I think that's where some of the angst is coming from, is that these are American companies, and especially with Elon Musk, that there's kind of an entire social media platform, obviously, in his hands. He's got control over algorithms, over the way that this works. And I think that loss of control, and we've seen this with the conversation between Alice Weidel and Elon Musk as well, there's a sense there that this must be limited or supervised in some shape or form, but they don't really know how. And that's, I think, what makes a lot of German politicians and commentators quite anxious about this.
And why do you think Elon Musk has it in for poor old Olaf Scholz as he does for poor old Keir Starmer?
Well, it's along the same lines, the criticism. So it's basically the idea that the governments are anti-business, that they regulate too much, there's too much bureaucracy. Immigration is a big thing. Obviously, that features in both of these discussions. So in Britain, it's the focus is on the grooming gangs. In Germany, the focus is on sort of illegal immigration and asylum seekers and the security implications of that. And he's basically picked on the governments or on the people that he thinks are responsible for that to try and bring about a shift towards more right-leaning governments that will have different policies on these issues.
But I mean, one of the other points is that the reason why Elon Musk has found governments in Europe, an easy target is because they're just not delivering in the way that they had promised they would deliver. And that, that's one of the reasons why Reform UK is doing well here. It's one of the reasons why the AfD is now the second highest party in terms of polling. I mean, they may not be able to deliver themselves if they ever get the chance of government, but there is a sort of vacuum of competence and power, is there not?
Yeah, that's right. And I think the issues that these parties address, and I've been saying this for years as well, as far as the AfD in Germany is concerned, they just weren't addressed, not even acknowledged largely by the mainstream parties. So immigration in Germany in particular, since Angela Merkel's decision in 2015 to allow by now millions basically of people into the country without largely checking who they are or where they've come from. People sort of just like throw their passports away before they enter the country. And now we've had the Christmas market attack in Magdeburg. Sure. There was a stabbing in Solingen in September, in the summer. Where basically these are people who've come to the country and hated what they found there, basically, and attacked that. So, all of this comes together to give people a sense that the governments aren't looking out for them anymore, and that they're more interested in their own values and their own ideology than the safety of their people. And I think that's gathering momentum, and parties like Reform or like the AfD speak to that, and Elon Musk is amplifying those sort of messages.
And such is the shadow of German history that, politicians or authorities are always trying to kind of get the right balance between, hard-won freedoms and, clamping down on extremism. And on that note, Elon Musk's conversation with the leader of the far-right AfD, Alice Weidel, is now apparently under investigation by the German federal government. Is that going too far?
I think it certainly plays into some of the reasons why the AfD is so buoyant in the first place. When there are surveys now that show that only 40% of Germans feel now that they can speak freely about anything. That used to be over 80% back in the 70s and 80s when these surveys started. So something has shifted. And when you have a conversation going on, very podcasty, very casual conversation between two people, whoever they are, and you've got 150 EU officials and officials from the German parliament watching that to see if they can find reasons to ban it or to limit that, whether that's justified or not, it is going to confirm this kind of sense that you can't have a free conversation in public anymore. And that, I think, is backfiring big style because people are just, feeling that their anxieties and their, the things that they're angry about basically get proven true.
Just finally, Katja, I've briefly met Alice Weidel a few times. She's quite an extraordinary character. The head of the AfD I'm talking about, ex-Goldman Sachs. She's openly gay, lives with her Sri Lankan partner, I think much of the time in Switzerland. Is very, very smart and, is in charge of this party that is mainly known for its sort of, bigoted, older men, but also increasingly young supporters. Can you ever imagine her being the Chancellor of Germany?
Well, I think not in the foreseeable future, because there's the so-called firewall that is being held up by the other parties against the AfD, and you'll always have a coalition government in Germany, so another party needs to work with them. But I think they said that in Austria, with the right-wing FPÖ, and now they've been asked to form a government because the other parties just cannot find enough common ground anymore to form coalitions against them. So I wouldn't say never, but what I would say, and what I have also said in various of my columns and pieces, is that Alice Weidel doesn't necessarily represent the entire AfD, as you've just alluded to as well. She's a very sort of interesting character, really, but doesn't, because she's female, she's openly gay, as you say, she lives in a relationship with her Sri Lankan partner. She represents the comparatively moderate end of the AfD, and there is a hardcore wing under the Thuringian politician Björn Höcke as well. And they're actually having a party conference this weekend where they're still arguing whether to use kind of far-right slogans like remigration in their party manifesto, which Alice Weidel was careful to avoid. But there's this wing within our party that wants that back in, basically, and wants a much more radical program than she would advocate. So I would just urge a little bit of caution. Alice Weidel is not the entire AfD party.